Welcome, House Church number 2 live stream. I hope you are all well. And here we are, Palm Sunday. Probably a very different Palm Sunday to the one that any of us has ever experienced before. Most of us, all of us, I'm sure, will be in our homes watching live streams. Some of you are watching mine, obviously, if you're listening to me. A very different Sunday to the one that we all imagined some weeks ago. I'm just going to bring my notes up so that I know what it is that I'm preaching on. So bear with me. I might put my glasses on. So I'm going to see if I can read it without my glasses going up and down. This week, I've been thinking about the prodigal son story. I was actually reminded of it because of an event that happened the other day with my son. I'd had probably not my finest parenting day with my son. We'd had moments of really enjoying each other's company, and then we'd had moments, bear with me, I just realised I haven't actually set my audio record. So if you give me 1 second, this is so that the audio can go on the website. Welcome for those of you listening now on my website. I just starting my preach. So I've been thinking about the prodigal son story, and I spent a day with my son. It wasn't a great day. We'd had moments of enjoying each other's company, and we'd had moments of it not being brilliant. And actually, if I'm really honest, much worse than not just being brilliant. I'd got upset, I'd got angry with him. We'd had lots of I'm sorry. And we'd got to the evening, and I was making dinner, and my son came into the kitchen, and I had a drink, and we all had drinks. And I asked him if he wanted some sparkling water with some squash. And my son kind of looked at me and he said, no. And I said, oh, are you sure you wouldn't like a fizzy water and some squash to have a drink? We've all got drinks. And he said, no. And I said, are you saying no because you don't want the drink? Or are you saying no because you think you don't deserve the drink? And he said it was because he thought he didn't deserve it. And in that moment, my heart ached for him. You see, the truth is that none of us actually deserve the grace that we're afforded. It's literally outrageous. And that's why I've called this preach on Palm Sunday, outrageous grace. You see, thinking about the prodigal son, I actually want to be like the father. In the story of the 3 characters, I want to be the father. I want to be standing there with my arms wide open, welcoming the son in, no matter what he's done. But actually, more often than not, I find that the character that I most in my life have represented has been the older son. The one who, when he saw his dad getting everything ready to throw a party for his brother, stropped off outside and said, I don't want to be part of this. I don't want to be any part of it. It's not fair. Refusing. He refused to extend mercy and forgiveness. He just felt angry, resentful, and hard done by. I've often spent time living in the world of it's not fair. I've been hard-hearted and extremely judgmental. But in that moment with my son, I got to exchange his feelings of I've messed up, I haven't done well today, I've upset mum, she's cross with me. I got to take that off his shoulders and actually meet him with love and go, no, here. It was a small thing, sparkling water and some squash. It made me wonder, what is it about the scandalous story of God's outrageous grace that causes some to feel offended? It was true in Jesus' time. Certainly, he seemed to cause this reaction to people. The holders of religious law, the teachers of faith, they judged his actions as not good enough, not rabbinical enough, not Moses enough. Sitting down eating with tax collectors and sinners, not washing hands before eating, healing on a Sabbath. They saw a drunkard and a glutton rather than a ministry over a meal. Demon possessed, not God filled. Lawbreaker over law fulfiller. As they believed, so they perceived. See, the truth is that disappointments, hurts, grief, losses, unfulfilled hopes and dreams, broken marriages, family rifts, childless families, divorce, death, it will all have an impact on us. Each valley of death and dry bones, it will affect how we walk through the rest of our allotted time here in this wonderful, amazing world of ours. I used to want to hide my scars and imperfections. I used to believe that they just illuminated the truth about myself, that I wasn't good enough. I used to think that in order to be loved, I had to be good enough. I tried so hard to be exactly that. Good enough to hear, "Well done, I'm so proud of you," from my parents. There's a line in Bridget Jones, the first movie, when the emotionally constipated Mark Darcy tells Bridget, after this awful dinner that she's been invited to with the married duns and she's the token singleton, he comes down the stairs, having not really spoken to her at all through the entire meal, and she leaves. And he stands on the stairs and he says that he likes her very much, just as she is. It's strange because that line always used to get me. And actually, when I was thinking about that for this particular talk, I had remembered it as that he said, "I love you just the way you are," which actually is a line that comes in later after she's cooked blue soup, thanks to the string that she's put in to tie up the asparagus, I think. And her friend raises a glass and says to Bridget, "We love you just the way you are." Now, it would seem that that phrase also had an impact on one of her friends, because when they're sitting in the pub and she's recounting what a total arse he is, she then says, "Actually, he said that he liked me just the way I am." And her friend, played by Sally Jones, makes a comment. You'll have to go and look at the movie if you want to see what she says. But the truth is, this weight of feeling the need to be perfect, it was exhausting. It caused me to do ridiculous things in my effort to quell the voice that would nag at my insides, telling me that I was annoying, irritating, hard work, too intense, on and on and on. Striving. I mean, I failed, of course, to be enough. Because you see, the measuring stick goes on and it's impossibly high, unreachably high. That's the thing about needing to be enough. Who says what enough is? And how do you know if you've managed to reach it? When your measuring stick is the one around you, or the one that the enemy wants to set, you're going to always be set up to fail. Unless, of course, you've bumped into this wonderful, wood-wielding, sandal-wearing, hand-scarred, servant-hearted man called Jesus. Scandalous grace. His grace was a scandal to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He offended the religious law and order, the measure of enough, everywhere he went. I'm going to read today, the piece is Luke 19:35 to 42. I'm going to read it from the Passion Translation. They brought the colt to Jesus. That's a donkey that hasn't been ridden on. And then they placed their prayer shawls on its back, and Jesus rode it as he descended the Mount of Olives towards Jerusalem. As he rode along, people spontaneously threw their prayer shawls on the path in front of him like a carpet. As soon as he got to the bottom of the Mount of Olives, the crowds of his followers shouted with a loud outburst. A loud outburst of ecstatic joy over all the mighty wonders of power that they had witnessed. They shouted over and over, "Highest praises to God for the one who comes as King in the name of the Lord. Heaven's peace and glory from the highest realm now comes to us." Some Jewish religious leaders who stood off from the procession said to Jesus, "Teacher, you must order your followers at once to stop saying these things." Jesus responded, "Listen to me. If my followers were silenced, the very stones would break forth with praises." When Jesus caught sight of the city, he burst into tears with uncontrollable weeping over Jerusalem, saying, "If only you could recognize that this day peace is within your reach, but you cannot see it." When Jesus rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, he knew Good Friday was coming. He knew the cross was waiting. Even as people lay their outer garments down, and some laid palms in the dust for him to ride over. He knew. And he kept coming. How very like Jesus. When I was looking into this talk for Palm Sunday, I wanted to understand what the significance was of the palms and why they waved it. You see, to the people of Israel, the Israelites, to the Jews, the palms were full of meaning. It was a sign of a victorious win of battle. It was a sign of power and royalty. Solomon had palms on his temple. It says so, as it's described. There were palms on the coins to show honor. Jesus was King of Kings and mighty Savior. That's what he was met with. Hosanna in the highest. The word that is used for their cloaks that they lay down, their outer garments, the word in Hebrew was talit. And that was the name given to the prayer shawl that had the 4 tassels on each corner to remind them of the 613 commandments of the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. What's interesting is on the collar of that talit, that prayer shawl, are the Hebrew's letter that spell out Lord of Lords and King of Kings. It's a symbolic reminder of the promised Messiah that was to come. Now, in some of the readings that I had, it suggested that by laying down their talits, their prayer shawls, the people were acknowledging Jesus as God's promised Messiah. They were declaring that Jesus was the one worthy to be called the Lord of Lords and the King of Kings. It's interesting, the timing, Jesus descending into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. You see, for the Jewish people, they were heading into Passover. So Jerusalem was heaving. It had been reinforced with extra Roman guards to try and keep the peace. The Passover, a time of retelling their ancestral story of release from Egypt and slavery. They had to daub their doorposts with blood of an unblemished lamb painted over the doors so that the angel of death would pass over. Story of the waters parting, of wandering in the wilderness. The Israelites knew what the feast of Passover was about, what they were honouring, retelling, remembering. They knew where they'd been. When Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey and cried, he cried because he knew that they would refuse to see who he was. Not because of what it would mean to him if they didn't see him, but what it would mean for those that did refuse to see him. He cried for their hard hearts, their religious, legalistic mindset that refused to see Jesus, the Lamb of God, because they were waiting for a Messiah in an outward display of a mighty king and warrior, and they missed the servant-hearted, wood-wielding, sandal-wearing Jesus, the Lamb. Jesus knew, and he had compassion, and he cried. And still he rode into the city. Excuse me, I'm moving my notes up. Jesus still went into the city. Jesus saw around the corner and he did it still. I wonder sometimes if I'd been able to see around some of my corners, if I'd been able to see what was to come, would I still have carried on my path? My decision to honour my mum's request 6 years ago to live with family when my dad died, which caused my brothers to turn their backs on me and my mum. If I'd known what the following 6 years would entail, would I still have said yes? I'd like to think so, but I certainly know that I would have felt overwhelmed by what was to come. If I'd known in every bit of detail, each of the walls I would have to walk over, all of the valleys of death and dry bones I would have to have gone through. I think I certainly would have doubted my ability to keep going. I'd have felt weighed down by the knowledge. Thankfully, God in his kindness meant I simply had to keep standing and trust him because I couldn't see round the corner. I had to choose tiny micro step after micro step. Sometimes I wasn't moving at all, I was just standing, but I was never alone. Not 1 minute. Yesterday, I just finished editing my 3rd chapter of my first book. And it's been a battle to actually get through that chapter. It's taken me weeks. By the very end of that part of my story, God had me in a field, in a mountain, Cad Idris, in mid-Wales, in Gwynedd. He had been talking to me about if he asked me to do things, he would always equip me. And it didn't matter how ridiculous or how outrageous or how scary or how impossible it might seem. If he asked me to do it, I had to trust him, that he would be with me, he would go before me, he would come behind me, he would stay with me, and that it would be okay. And that I was to put my trust in him and not my circumstances. He made me a promise. And he's never, ever, ever fallen short on that promise. God's kindness and his grace has kept me together over the last 6 years. When my own mind wanted to tell me that this felt like a prison, that I didn't want this, I didn't choose this, but it's kept me going. I referenced the day with my son when it reminded me of the prodigal son. That day, it kept me going. There have been many days as a parent. It kept me going when I stood in my kitchen at the end of another difficult, tough day of being a single parent, home educator, full-time carer, feeling like a failure on every level. Terrible mother, terrible daughter. The day I told my son that I divorced myself from him. Burst out of a final straw of every straw that could possibly break. It wasn't my finest hour. But in that moment, when I was a snotty mess on my bedroom floor, feeling utterly terrible about the words that had just come out of my mouth, God knew. He didn't point his finger at me and tell me that, yeah, you're right. You are a terrible mum. You shouldn't have said that. He knew as I unburdened my soul to him how to hold me, how to be with me, how to kneel with me on my bedroom floor. He was moved with compassion, not judgment, as I wept. As I said I was sorry, and would he please forgive me for what I had just shouted out at my son in utter desperation and exhaustion and upset and anger. He was with me when I walked back down the stairs, when I held my son and said I was sorry. I should never have said those awful words and that I didn't mean it. And of course, I could never divorce myself from him because I loved him and I always would. I just sometimes struggled to deal with the behaviour. God has covered me in his grace again and again and again. His grace that forgives, releases, restores. Jesus saw Friday coming, but he kept going because he also saw the Sunday morning moment. In Luke 18:31-33, with his disciples, it says, taking the 12 disciples aside, Jesus said, listen, we're going up to Jerusalem, where all the predictions of the prophets concerning the Son of Man will come true. He will be handed over to the Romans, and he will be mocked, treated shamefully, and spit upon. They will flog him with a whip and kill him. But on the third day, he will rise again. Jesus saw Friday coming, but he kept going because he also saw the Sunday morning moment. Those scars of mine, those bumps and bruises, they've all been healed. Now I have edges that have been sanded down through season after season of bumping up against my circumstances and allowing God to hold me, to mold me, to tell me I'm loved, just as I am, just as I always was. Not perfect, just willing. Not captive, set free. God's grace poured out for me, for you, for all of us. His outrageous grace because he loves us, because he's for us. He's not an angry headmaster sitting up in the sky on the clouds, waiting to smite us, put us into detention, give us lines every time we get it wrong. The enemy wants us to believe that that's who he is, but it's not. You see, the wonderful thing about discovering God's grace, it not only set me free from the horrid little narrator inside my head, but it also set me free from believing and therefore perceiving things about myself and others that weren't true. These days, when I feel more like the older brother than the prodigal son, I can choose. Instead of like the older brother who refused to come in, who stayed outside and went, no, I'm not coming in. It's not fair. It's not fair. He's gone off. He's lost all of the money, spent it, had a good time, and now he's coming back. and you're going to throw him a party and give him the fattened calf and a cloak and a ring, whilst I stayed here, worked hard, diligently, never gave me even a goat, a chicken, nothing to go and celebrate with my friends. And you never said thank you. Instead of being that prodigal son's older brother, my son didn't have to not have the drink that he wanted. No, I don't want it, thanks. No, I don't deserve it. He got to have sparkling water with elderflower cordial. And I get to not be stuck outside, out of the party, out of the celebration, feeling hard done by on the island of it's not fair, because that's what it is. It's an island, and it isolates you. It pulls you away from everybody else. These days, because I've discovered the outrageous grace of a God who saves, of a God who sent his son, his precious, precious son, to see round the corner and still keep going into the city to be nailed to the cross. Because Sunday was coming, when he would rise from the grave and death would have no more hold over any of us. And the penalty for all of the things that we ever did, all the way back to Adam and Eve, would finally be paid, and we could be set free. These days, when the enemy wants to tell me, go and be the older brother, go outside, it's not fair. It's not fair. I get to choose not to listen to that little voice. I get to choose to come in and join in the party and celebrate. I can feel part of something instead of alone. I can know that I am loved, even and especially when I mess up, which is such a relief because I mess up a lot. I get to exhale. I get to rest, free from striving. Outrageous grace. There's that wonderful song, isn't there? I always hear Stephanie Gretzinger when it comes into my head. We couldn't earn it and we don't deserve it. Still, he gives himself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. The wonderful thing about discovering grace and grabbing hold of it with both hands and not letting it go and not listening to the horrid little voice in my head that will tell me I'm not enough, not good enough, that I'm failing. I get to silence that and go, no, Jesus died on a cross for me. That's how much I'm loved. Palm Sunday, Jesus rode in on a donkey, not a horse, humble, the wood-wielding, sandal-wearing, servant-hearted Jesus. He rode in. He knew the cross was coming, but he knew Sunday was coming too. I get to say, no, that's not who I am. That's not how God sees me. He loves me. And what's more, it's also changed my perspective on how I respond to others too. When you live as the prodigal son's older brother on your little island of it's not fair, everything around you, your measuring stick, tells you how unfair the island of unfairness really is. When you choose to hold on to grace, you get to be able to extend it to others. Which means I can have a soft heart when my son is busy with his own measuring stick and refusing a drink that I know he wants because he feels he doesn't deserve it. I can encourage him with love and kindness rather than judgment and self-righteousness. And then I can be the father to his prodigal son, offering a ring and a robe and throw him a party rather than point out a bed in the attic or under the stairs if you're Harry Potter where he needs to go and sleep. Not perfect. We're not perfect, but we can be willing, just willing. God's outrageous grace, always flowing. It never runs out and it never runs dry. And there is nothing that we can do that will mean it will never apply either. We just get to come and say we're sorry. So I want to end. I've just got to find my phone. Can you just pass me my phone? On a prayer that I saw this morning. I might need my glasses, which are on the top of my head. That's lucky. Greg had put this up on his Lectio app, and I really liked it. So I'm going to end this morning. So if you want to close your eyes, I'm going to read a prayer by Thomas Merton. Lord, give me humility in which alone is rest, and deliver me from pride, which is the heaviest of burdens. Possess my whole heart and soul with the simplicity of love. Occupy my whole life with the one thought and the one desire of love, that I may love not for the sake of merit, not for the sake of perfection, not for the sake of virtue, not for the sake of sanctity, but for you alone. Amen.
Amen.
Have a great rest of your Palm Sunday. See you next week. Okay, bye.